Hello, and welcome to the American Songbook Association's Sunday Sessions series. This series is an ongoing fundraiser for our expanding education programs. The American Songbook Association reaches thousands of students nationwide, teaching jazz, musical theater, and the great American songbook in an effort to preserve and promote these timeless American musical legacies. This programming also includes Cabaret Scenes magazine, the official magazine of the ASA devoted to covering live music in the United States and Europe. We hope that you enjoy each episode of this Sunday Sessions series. We ask that you subscribe to our YouTube channel and that you consider a donation. Every dollar helps us keep the music playing. See the banner at the bottom of your screen for details. Thank you. And now, here is your Sunday Sessions series host, Carolyn Montgomery.
Hi, and welcome. I hope you are sipping something cool and sitting in front of your air conditioning on this steamy summer day. Actually, this series began 2 years ago during the pandemic as a way to keep people in touch with their favorite artists and keep things current and actually just get us through. But it was so popular and so much fun that we've continued it to this day. And I'm glad to see people are still watching. Thank you. This is an exciting show today because the American Songbook Association, of which I am the executive director and also the director of education, is bestowing on October 2nd our first annual Darrell Henline Award to a recipient whose professional career in the field of cabaret has been one of consistent excellence and distinction. Darrell Henline was the founding father of our official magazine. It's 27 years old, Cabaret Scenes magazine. And he was also the publisher until he died in 2005. Darrell has set a very high bar for cabaret and in so had a very, very high regard for our guest today, who has been on the cover of Cabaret Scenes twice. He has a 50-year career as an actor on stage, in film, in television. He has a large and successful vocal studio where he teaches so many working actors. He is a director and a producer, and he is the one. Please help me welcome Eric Michael Gillett. Hello, my dear.
Hi, Carolyn.
Are you staying cool?
I am staying as cool as I can stay in this weather.
Good. I know it's ridiculous. I'm glad to see you, and I'm glad to see that you're here today. The first thing I want to ask you, because everybody's very curious, is how did you weather the pandemic? I know we're sort of looking at it like it's behind us, but what did you do during that time?
Well, I think like a lot of people, I didn't think it would last as long as it did.
Right.
So I sort of went through the 5 stages of pandemic grief, you know, which was essentially chocolate chip banana bread, air fryer, pasta maker, bread maker. You get the idea. And
exactly the same thing.
I volunteered for a lot of benefits and a lot of performances, some Sondheim tributes out of a theater in Arizona that was run by a friend of mine, as well as the tributes that helped to keep the West Bank Cafe open.
Right.
I did a lot of that sort of thing. I did a friend of mine, Polly McKee, over at Irish Rep. She runs a thing called Polly's Follies. I would join in there on Sundays occasionally, which interestingly, she was actually doing from Scotland. So there were people all the way in Los Angeles. So you can imagine the time differences that were going on.
Wow.
And eventually I found I had something I wanted to say. So I hooked up with Bernie Firshpound over at Metropolitan Zoom, and I put together a pair of Metro Zoom concerts, one of which was called Jump Cut, which was just basically how did we get from spring of 2020 to spring of 2021? How did we get there and where were we going to go? And then in the summer, I was turning 70. So for my 70th birthday, I decided I wasn't seeing a lot of people, so I was going to sing. And I wrote a show called Water Under the Bridge, which we did on Metro Zoom on my birthday. And then my musicians and I and our publicist, Sophie Kaw, all went out to 1803 and got wildly and passionately drunk. It was quite a night.
Fabulous. I think that's wonderful. Yeah, you didn't let any grass grow. That's amazing. So I am going to now just take us through the trajectory of small Eric Michael Gillett all the way until 71-year-old Eric Michael Gillett. I am curious to know where you were born, and when we do, as you know, the ASA has a lot of students that follow this, and they want to know about you, where you're from, a little bit about your family. So where were you born?
I was born in Hollywood, California. The hospital was called Queen of Angels, and it no longer exists. It was one of the many places that came down in the big quakes in the 70s.
Right.
I grew up in Culver City and then in Venice Beach, where
Okay.
we were the ocean, the sand, the boardwalk in our house. And
Wow.
then when I was about 8 years old, we moved back to Culver City. It was Kelton Avenue, I remember, and I could see MGM Studios literally from my bedroom window.
Oh my
When I
goodness.
was about 12, we moved out to Orange County, and that's where I went to high school. And the minute I turned 17, I moved away from Orange County because I didn't
Yeah.
like it there very much.
You-
No offense to anyone there, but
Yeah.
so I moved back to Hollywood, and I lived there for quite some time. So that was my sort of my beginning, my studying and stuff. I was at Cal State Fullerton and Cypress College, and eventually I studied at a musical theater workshop at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. It was the LA Civic Light Opera sponsored musical theater workshop. A lot of very famous people came out of that program.
Yep. Yep.
And it was there that I was told that I would never be a singer and I would not make a living as a singer, and not to try, that I was in the program because I was an actor. And in fact, I think the other actor that they said, "You're an actor, not a singer," was he became very famous, Billy Catt.
Oh.
And whose mother was, of course, one of the stars of Perry Mason.
Mm-hmm.
And so the problem was I really wanted to sing. So I went looking until I found the teacher who became the biggest influence on my life, Jan Ritchell. And she was my voice teacher for 40 years till she passed away. She
Wow.
was an immense influence on me. And if at 71, I still sound like I did when I was 30, it's because of her.
Right. Well, that is amazing. Now, what's your family structure like? Do you have any siblings?
Well, it's a rough year to ask that question. I had 5 sisters. My middle sister, Judith, passed away in January very suddenly. So now there are 5 siblings. There's 4 sisters and myself. And my mother passed away several years ago, and then Judith was the second loss. So right now it's the sisters in order. I'm the oldest, so my sisters in order are Janice, Barbara, Kathy, and Susan.
Right.
And we're still very close all these years later, amazingly. Some families are not.
Yeah.
And they support me in what I do. So I'm very fortunate about that, because a lot of families don't understand what it is to do this business, this craziness.
It's a lot, and it causes people who care deeply about you to worry about you.
Something chronic.
That's right. That's right. So you stayed on the West Coast until after college.
Yeah, I traveled. The first time I ever really traveled, I was in a group called, don't laugh, we were the Cole Porter Singers.
Okay.
And so I had been doing dinner theater in California, and we were up doing a show at the Sheraton. I think it was Damn Yankees. And the Sheraton was individually owned like a franchise, and it went bankrupt. So while my friend Ann Peck and I were down in Southern California at a reunion for the Civic Light Opera organization, we were informed not to go back, that the hotel had closed and all of our belongings had been confiscated. So the cast got all of our stuff out and came back, but we were there with the producer, and the producer felt so bad, she put us into a group called the Cole Porter Singers. And we started touring. I think the farthest afield we went was Guatemala City, of all things. And then she put Ann and I together into a duo that played on Princess Cruises for a bit called The Perfect Match. Don't ask. They were not referring to the two of us. They were referring to her. So, and interestingly, I'm still friends with Ann all these many, 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 many years later. And then from there, I realized that I was not happy with the offers that we were getting. I think one summer we were offered the Dr. Pepper review at the California State Fair. And I thought, if this is the best I can do, I'm going to go get a civilian job. And I turned it down. And in the middle of that summer, I was working at IBM, I think. And I got a phone call from a friend saying they were casting replacements for Hallelujah Hollywood in Las Vegas, and I should really go. And I got my stuff together, and I woke up the morning of, and I thought, if I don't go and I just roll over and go back to bed, nobody will be the wiser. I can just say I didn't get it. And I fell asleep for another hour. And when I woke up an hour later, I was in panic because I realized that if I didn't go, I could never call myself an actor again. Because if I was lying to get out of an audition, then I was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So I went, and they were looking for 3 boy next door tenors. This is back before I really had high tenor notes. And so I figured I wasn't going to get it. But they hired 4 singers. They hired 3 boy next door tenors and me. And I spent 2 years in Hallelujah Hollywood, during which time I got hired by Terry Ralston to work with Peggy Lee to get my equity card doing Side by Side by Sondheim out in, I think it was in Birmingham, Michigan, which is a suburb of Detroit. And the rest, as they say, is history. I came back, the show closed, I went to California, I got my first production contract in a Buddy Ebsen produced musical with Jan Clayton, who is, of course, the original Julie Jordan, and is also my hero because she was Lassie's, little Timmy's mother on Lassie. And that sort of was the beginning, you know, it was the beginnings of a career, and I was very lucky because
and you were all of jobs kept coming. That time? 22?
Oh, no. I was 24 or 5 at the point. By the time all of this happened, I was about 25. So by the time I went to Vegas, I went to Vegas in 78. So I turned 27 the day that I got the job.
Oh, wow.
So I was doing a lot of other stuff before that. I mean, I worked all the time, but the real career started when I turned 27.
Right. And just backtracking quickly, as a really little guy, were you very were you about singing? Were you about being in productions? Did you feel that way? Did you take piano lessons, or did it all come through somewhere around high school, puberty?
I took no lessons, and unfortunately I went to one of those high schools that had no arts programs. But my mother used to say that I came out of the womb kicking and singing. And I don't think that there was a day in my young life where I didn't sing. I was in the choir when I was in elementary school. I was a boy soprano. I stopped singing for a while when my voice changed because I really didn't know why I couldn't sing the way I'd been able to sing.
Sure.
And eventually, my senior year in high school, we had no drama department, but the music department put on a musical, and I was not part of the music department. I was more into speech and debate and that sort of thing at that time. Mm-hmm. But I decided to audition because they were doing a show I loved, Oklahoma. And one of the people from the Madrigal group asked me when I showed up at the audition, well, what are you doing here? I said, well, I thought I'd audition for the show. And he said, well, what part? And I said, well, I was thinking maybe Judd Fry, because I only knew the movie. So I knew that there was just Poor Judd is Dead. And he looked at me and says, well, you know, he has to really sing, like really snotty, really snarky.
Yeah.
And I looked at him and I said, what part are you going out for? And he goes, Will Parker. I'm going to play Will Parker. And I said, okay. So I left and I went home. And what nobody knew about me back then was I may not have been much of a singer, but I was a terrific mimic. Uh-huh. And all those years of dramatic interp and humorous interp, that all came in very handy. I could do voices like crazy. And I listened to Gene Nelson on the Oklahoma soundtrack all night. And I went back the next day and I did a pitch perfect Gene Nelson. And that kid became my understudy. Ha ha. So
that is wonderful. That's
so how great. I got in. I say to people, I got in on a dare.
Yeah. And did you love it?
Yeah, I did. I had a wonderful time doing the show, and I kept on. I had a lot of friends at high schools that did have drama programs. Yeah. And because in competitive speech, you're associating with schools all over your district. Mm-hmm. And that summer, a bunch of them were auditioning for a production of How to Succeed in Business out in Huntington Beach. And I went out and I got cast. I think I played Mr. Bratt, who sings The Secretary Is Not a Toy. Mm-hmm. And I was hooked. I auditioned for the rep company at my college at Cal State Fullerton. And it was kind of a weird thing. I was actually the first freshman ever to perform in the rep, because the freshman before me who had been cast in the rep, she was supposed to be the lead in The House of Bernarda Alba, died in a car crash before she performed. So it was kind of a weird thing, you know.
Right. But, yeah.
I did Major Barbara with them and had a wonderful time. And then shortly thereafter, I just started getting professional offers and I started taking jobs and started traveling more.
Well, here's a question too that I'm really interested in as a vocal coach, and you are a very esteemed voice teacher. and coach for a lot of great singers. I'm so curious to hear about why somebody would tell you early. I've heard you sing. You're a singer, absolutely great singer. And I'm not blowing smoke up your skirt. I wouldn't say anything if I didn't
Thank
think
heavens,
so.
because I'm not wearing the skirt today.
Wig, so there you go, and me either. But the truth is, you really are a very fine singer. The quality, the sound of your voice. So, what happened? If people were saying you were a singer and they were telling you what was going on, was it just that you didn't have the proper training? You didn't know what to do with your instrument?
I had no training, and I could carry a tune.
Yeah.
I had a very limited range. I think my high note was probably an F sharp. My low was a middle C.
Okay.
And because I wasn't trained, I imitated people more than I sang in my own voice. And I was what we generously call in the business a scooper, especially in mid range.
Yep.
And I went to a lot of teachers to try and find a teacher that could teach me. And as you know, it's the old saying about kissing a lot of frogs. I went to a lot of very, very good teachers, some of them bel canto, which is the method that I'm trained in. And I remember one in particular, he was probably about 42, and he had a voice that sounded like a car was turning over. The engine was turning over. A lot of, oh.
Yeah.
And even not being trained, I knew that was wrong. And there was, Los Angeles is a very small theatrical community, or it was then. And pretty much you heard everybody sing at the Masonic Temple, which is where most auditions took place. So you sort of knew who was who when you went into a room. It was the same guys always up for the same parts.
Yeah.
And you knew, okay, this person was trained by Seth and Flo Riggs. This one was trained by Lee and Sally Sweetland. And then every once in a while you would hear a singer whose voice you couldn't place. And you go like, I don't know who their teacher is. But inevitably, when you talk to them, they sounded when they spoke exactly the way they sounded when they sang. And if I asked them who their teacher was, all these people with these disparate sounds, turned out they all came from the same studio. They were all with Jan Ritchell. And I was doing a production of Promises, and a woman named Kathy Wilson, who had been my Lucy when I did You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, was playing the role of the pit singer. And if you know that score, she's got to sing all that. That stuff in Turkey Lurkey.
Yeah.
And I said to her, I got to know, because your voice is so different from 2 years ago. I said, who do you study with? And sure enough, it was Jan Ritchell.
Okay.
So I called Jan, and Jan had a waiting list that was unbelievable at that time, probably 2 years to get into her studio. And I interviewed with her, and I think she felt sorry for me. I think she could tell how badly I wanted it. But she agreed to teach me, and she said, I'll put you in. I will add an hour to my day, 2 days a week. If you miss, I'll drop you. Right. And so I would get up at 6:30 in the morning to go to an 8:30 a.m. voice lesson on Tuesdays and Fridays. And then Jan would start her regular day at 9:30 and go till 5:30. And then she would go and conduct at Long Beach Civic Light Opera.
Wow.
But she literally taught me from the ground up. She created my instrument. And,
so would you tell a young singer that was watching this that, do you ever listen to singers and say, oh my God, that voice would be from God if only you knew how to produce it?
Of course you do. You listen to an instrument. Like whenever I take a student on, it's always the first. Look, I'm not an insurance salesman. I don't have to close every deal. And I insist on a diagnostic first, and I also insist on a free session that they come in and we spend an hour together getting to know each other. Because when I was growing up, I paid for all of those lessons I took with teachers I didn't end up with.
Yeah.
And nowadays that's an expensive proposition. So I want to know not just if the student is right for me, but am I right for the student? So when we talk about the voice, I ask them to sing something for me that they feel that they knock out of the ballpark. And then I ask them to sing something that they feel is technically challenging, that they have not mastered, because that tells me pretty much everything I need to know in one session. And I do a lot of poking and prodding and looking into the mouth and seeing what the jaw is like and how is the breath, where is the breath going, what's the support like. But it's mostly about finding out if they will listen and take adjustments. And if they can adjust in a diagnostic where they don't really know me, then they can probably work in the studio on a long-term basis. And I'm very fortunate because the students that I have done some pretty remarkable stuff over the years. And I feel like I'm able to keep alive what Jan taught me. As with all teachers, you add your own filigree to things. But honestly, I think the basics of what I teach are completely grounded in what I learned from Jan over 40 years with her, and in the year or so that I spent studying with her to teach.
Right.
Because what she asked was that there were 3 or 4 of us that she said, I really think you could keep what I do alive. And I think you're qualified to do it. Would you come and work? And so I would go home on breaks and spend a week watching lessons and then teaching a lesson while she observed, that sort of thing.
Right.
And when I got my confidence and I felt like I was ready to do it, I taught for free for a year or 2, just to make sure that what I was doing was healthy and followed the tenets of what I knew and understood to be good teaching. I mean, to me, a teacher is like a doctor. It's first do no harm.
Yep.
It's just whatever you do, don't harm the voice.
Right.
And so the best compliment I ever got, one of the great teachers of this last century is Kelly O'Hara's teacher, and Florence Birdwell. She also taught Kristen Chenoweth and Laura Teeter and Stacey Logan. And so plainly, this was a gifted woman.
Right.
And she taught very much what Jan taught, very much the same thing, almost in exactly the same style. And I had a student with me for a while who then went home to visit and took a lesson. And she came back. She says, well, Flo says he must be okay. He's not screwing you up. So I said, I'll take that. That's a compliment coming from her.
Absolutely.
Because she had the, she knew what she was doing. And the technicians that she has turned out are brilliant. So.
Yeah, amazing. Well, so when did New York become your home?
Well, there's 2 dates associated with that. I always wanted to live in New York, but my career took me different places. I was in Vegas for 6 or 7 years, going back and forth to Hollywood during periods of that. Then right when I planned to move to New York, I actually rented an apartment here with a friend of mine from Las Vegas, and she and I were going to move here. I got offered Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. So I literally only lived in the apartment for 4 weeks, and then I was on the road with the circus. And I intended to come back in a year, but they kept upping the salary and upping the contract, and I stayed 11, actually 11 and a half if you count the times I went back in 98. And but I did rent an apartment here again in 95 with an eye toward moving here. And in 97, when the contract was up for renewal for 98, I just said I was done. And so I've had the apartment since 95 and have lived here since early 98.
Right. And so 11 and a half years, that's a long career with the circus.
Oh, yes.
How many weeks out of the year traveling?
50.
Wow.
50. You open the show on Christmas Day, if I remember correctly. You would rehearse on Christmas Eve, and then everybody leaves. Christmas Day would be the opening in Venice. Then you tour all the way till Thanksgiving, and then you'd have 2.5 weeks off while the train moved from Chicago down to West Palm Beach. And then you start up again right around the 3rd week of December and go another full year, and then again close it just after Thanksgiving. And then the train would come back to Florida, and the new cast would join in Florida and start rehearsing the new show. So even though you were off for a bit, you were really going right back into rehearsal. So our official break was about 2 weeks.
And how long were you in each spot?
Well, there's 2 halves of the tour. The first half used to be called the concert tour, and the back half was the rodeo route. The concert tour, in the years before I joined it, they played New York, for instance, for as long as 10 or 12 weeks.
Right.
By the time I joined, New York was only 6 weeks, and by the time I left, New York was only 2 weeks. So, but generally, each city was 1 week to 2 weeks, and occasionally you would be in an area like Los Angeles. You'd be there for 4 or 5 weeks, like maybe a week in Anaheim, a week in Long Beach, and 2 weeks at the Sports Arena in LA.
Right.
Here in New York, it was a week or 2 at the Meadowlands and a week at Nassau, and then anywhere from 2 to 5 weeks at the Garden. That
Right.
changed a lot over the years, but that was the basics of it when I was doing it.
And that's so rigorous. That's really rigorous for 11 years. Was it whirlwind? From the experience, what do you think you got from those 11 years, other than being paid very, very well? Was there
Stamina. I think Vegas was the same. I mean, listen, of course, there were many other wonderful things I got. The circus is my family. Everybody says the theater is your family. The theater is a small village. The circus is a family. I can still walk into a circus lot almost anywhere in the world, and I know people, or I know them. I knew their parents, or I sang at their parents' weddings, or know. So, in fact, when Circus Vasquez was here this last winter, I was out there a tremendous amount because my friend David Larible, who is their star clown, and his family, I've known him since 80, since 91. We
Wow.
stayed friends all these years. And
Yeah.
his family's extended. So there, like, I was down to see his sister and her family down in South Carolina at Myrtle Beach over the summer. So when you go, it's like you're being it's as if the conversation had never stopped.
Right.
In
And
the theater, you catch up.
Yeah. Is it a family affair? I mean, are there circus families where the
Oh,
young
yeah.
kids come up and do what their parents are doing?
Oh, very much so. Very much so.
That's fascinating. There's a book in there. That's really something.
I'm sure it's been written. The thing about circus is there are circus families, and then there are circus dynasties. So there are owners who've kept a circus going for years. You've got in Europe, you've got Corona, you've got Knie. When Ringling went down, it was one of the great losses in the circus world. But you still had in America, you still had Circus Vargas, Circus Vasquez, you name it. There's a million. Right. And then, of course, I do think that the corporate circuses, the Cirque du Soleil family, is a little bit different. It's a little more about show business as opposed to what we shared on the road in the style in which we travel.
Yeah.
On Ringling, you traveled on a train. Other shows, they travel, by bus and truck. So they're traveling their RVs across the country.
Right. Wow.
I had the opportunity to direct Big Apple Circus back in 2010-11, and they travel more like a traditional circus, although not as much, because they have the big season at Lincoln Center, and then they go to the south, down to Atlanta and places like that for several weeks. It's not like not like Ringling, which was like a year-long affair.
Right. Wow. And so you finish that, and then where do you go? What do you do?
Well, I moved to, first of all, I started singing in cabarets. I had sung in cabarets in Los Angeles back in the early 80s. In fact, KT Sullivan and I got our start at the same place. We used to sing together at a place called the Rose Cafe and Cabaret, which was a wine bar over on, I want to say it was on Melrose. And that's where I met her. It's the first time I heard her sing her version of Oklahoma, which she sings as a ballad, which was just stunning. And I made my debut there as well. And when I got into the circus, they had staff or house writers. And I just felt that they weren't writing to the best of what I could do. So I convinced David and his sister Vivian if I could get the right writers, would they let me push to have Mr. Feld write a song for Vivian's act? Right. And so in their third year on the show, his second tour, in the middle of my first tour with them, I did my first cabaret show in New York. KT introduced me to Danny Apollinaire and John Britton over at Danny's Skyline Room. Yep. And while the circus was in town, I came in with a show called Serious Stuff and Nonsense. And we had it all. I had a clown guest star. KT guested in the show. We had like a 7-piece band. I mean, it was just cabaret overkill. Yeah. But, I came from a world of big production. So, so we did the show, and I got Kenneth Feld to see the show. And the next day, he came backstage at Madison Square Garden and extended my contract for 4 years, at which point I got Vivian to pitch to him the idea of hiring writers. Right. And he hired a pair of writers. I knew the composer, Jerry Sternbach, and he brought on his lyricist, Lindy Robbins. And they wrote the entire score for the Children of the Rainbow Tour, and that was sort of the beginning of history. But because of that, I was already performing in cabarets long before I moved back to New York. Right. In fact, I got my Bistro Award, was one of the last ones given by Bob Harrington, because it was the year before he passed. So that December, I came to New York and was with, I think, Mary Foster Conklin, Lena Katrakis, Jay Rogers, Julie Halston. It was a great group of people.
Great group of very talented, wonderful people that really, I mean, look, cabaret has been around for a long time, but there's a difference between cabaret and singing sets, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's what these people create, real cabaret.
That's right. Real cabaret, which do you have, I mean, what I loved is I remember hearing Chita Rivera she was asked what cabaret was, and she said, well, it's a musical written by John Kander and Fred Ebb, first of all. and I remember I did just what you did. I laughed out loud, and then she got more esoteric about.
She said that on Michael Kirk Lane's show, didn't she?
Yes, she did.
90 Seconds to Why,
that's where I saw it. Yeah. And I remember thinking, Well, that's a great first answer. Now, do you have a sort of a definition of the genre of cabaret, what it is?
Well, I kind of think of cabaret as being a little like the old joke about, what is the difference between, courage and chutzpah. That courage is running through a cannibal camp in the nude, and chutzpah is running through a cannibal camp in the nude, but with parsley behind each ear.
Yes. Yes.
To me, cabaret is, it exists in a very small world. It's a very personal conversation between an artist and an audience, in which the audience learns more about you than they had ever known, that you had revealed through your press or through anything else. It's about revealing yourself, whatever the form it takes for you.
Yep.
And it's about I think it's about speaking and singing in your authentic voice, whatever that may be. So I see acts sometimes where I feel like, that's a really fine show. It's very entertaining, but I'm not moved. I don't feel anything more than I did when I walked in.
Right.
When I walked out of a Julie Wilson show in the day, as an example, I felt like I was her best friend. And she, by the way, she treated you as if you were her best friend if she knew you, which was great. But I felt the same about Margaret Whiting, Sylvia Sims, who was considered more of a saloon singer, but she had the same magic when she was up there. Her name is going to escape me, but she passed away for some time ago. Mary Claire Heron.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly the same thing.
Yes.
Mary Claire Heron was an artist
Wonderful.
who I could listen to her talk
the
entire hour if that's what she wanted to do, because she was fascinating. And I find that some people, when they get up to perform, it's about them. A friend of mine said a very funny thing, and I'm not using this title as a way to say anything about anybody, but they said, have you noticed people are writing a lot of, when I sing songs as we come out of the pandemic? And I said, yeah. And she says, does it bother you? And I said, well, I wish somebody would say when I sing for you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When we are all together again in the dark, when we are communing over whatever it is, this thing that we love, I think I would feel more comfortable with it. And there are a lot of young artists coming up and a lot of great Broadway performers who are stepping into the cabaret arena and concert arena, and they are terrifically talented. They're different.
Yeah.
They don't bring what Karen Akers can bring to the room necessarily, but they don't have to, because their fans don't expect that.
Right.
I work with Jared Spector and Kelly Barrett, and you walk away from an evening with them, and trust me, you have learned a lot in an hour, and you've been enormously entertained.
I saw their show together at 54 Below that you directed, and absolutely loved it. But I agree. I think it takes a certain amount of courage, although some people do it very naturally. I think Bette Midler does it just because she does it. But bringing your authentic self to the table, it's immediately recognizable. If you're
look at Jay Rogers,
Yeah, well, yes, there's another person who's absolutely himself.
Absolutely.
And it is detectable. You can see it, you can smell it. And it's somebody who, and the problem is, it's not so much, I feel that cabaret can be all about them. It's when they're projecting somebody they're not. I'm trying to be very kind, or I'm trying to be very funny, or I'm trying to be very, and I think, well, just be yourself, because that would be really wonderful. And if somebody's really doing it and harnessing it, it's always interesting.
Well, and there's also, there's the factor of knowing what it is you're doing. And I don't mean like the craft of it. People are either craft conscious or not. Right. I'm talking about what kind of a show is this? Like if you're doing an autobiography show, you need to know why you want us to hear your story. What's the point of this? How does it apply to me and to the greater world? If you're doing a composer showcase, you have to become the authority in one form or another. And it's interesting because there's ways around it. I remember my very first show with Karen Akers was a show called Simply Stein. And Karen said, how are we going to get into this? There's a lot of stuff he wrote. There's a lot of things to talk to him about. But Karen was going through some very, very big family stuff at the time. And what we did was we figured out how to tell her story through the Julie Stein songs. So we actually never spoke about Julie Stein until the thank yous at the very end. Right. Everything in the show was geared to the idea that men put women on pedestals and then wonder why they have to work so hard to stay there.
Yeah.
And so she knew going into the show what she was actually aiming at doing.
Yeah.
My favorite story of all time is KT Sullivan saying, again, we've known each other. She calls me her oldest friend in show business.
Yeah.
And I guess in some ways she is. But but KT asked me to direct a show. This is several years ago, and she said, "There's only 3 things you need to know. One of them, it has to be all Broadway music. The next one is it has to be called Autumn in New York, because that's what was pitched. And the third is I just want to be looked at as something more than a dessert." Because at that point, Stephen Holden in the Times just constantly referring to her as something like, she's like the perfect whipped cream dessert.
That's
and
right.
I said, well, okay, here's my 3 conditions. One of them is you have to let your audience see what you were when I first met you.
Right.
Because you were not a cautious singer then. You were an abandoned, willful, passionate person. And I want to bring that back to the table. The other thing is I said, Autumn in New York is not a problem for a title. That's when seasons open. That's when the theater starts. But I said, but you're going to have to let me get you a little mussed up. And she said, well, what kind of songs are you thinking about? And I said, okay. I said, I really want to include a couple of things from Applause, one of Eve Harrington's songs, One Halloween. And I really, really, really want you to sing Much More from the Fantastics.
Right.
And she freaked out because she said, that's a 16-year-old girl's song. And I said, okay, you're right and you're wrong. And I said, and here's where you're wrong. 3 nights ago, we stood here in the Oak Room, and you stood here and you said, the only thing I wish is that I could get another Broadway show. I said, so you are not 16 or 26 or 36 anymore, but you're still just as hungry as you were before you became one of the crown jewels in the Algonquin's crown. Right. You're still hungry, and Much More is about being hungry.
Yeah.
For more. And
I wish I could have seen that show. I bet it was amazing.
It was amazing. And she had the brilliant idea of couching everything through a marvelous book Diana Rigg collected. It was she didn't actually write it, but it's a collection of bad reviews. It's called No Turn Unstoned. And we quoted it throughout the evening, and the show was a huge hit for KT because it truly showed all the facets of her personality, of what makes her tick as an artist, as a human, as a woman. And it's probably to this day one of the shows I'm the most proud of.
That's so wonderful. Well, let's talk about that. This upcoming October 2nd, first annual Darrell Henline Award, given by the American Songbook Association at the incredible new venue, Chelsea Table and Stage, which I can't say enough about. It's so lovely. That will be at 6:30 on October 2nd. And the cast of people that are showing up for you are colleagues, students. It's so, we know KT Sullivan will be there, and Karen Akers. Adrienne Lennox. How do you know Adrienne Lennox? I'm so excited that she is going to be with us.
Another performer in the show that evening is actually my first singing partner here in New York, Melanie Vaughn. Melanie's done like 12 original cast Broadway shows.
Yeah,
she never replaced in a show.
Yeah.
And I got to know her very early on through my first director, Barry Kleinbord. And Melanie one night invited me to go see Dinah Was down in the Village, which Adrienne was in. And Adrienne just tore the roof off of the place.
She's just amazing.
And we got introduced, and I was a huge fanboy. And then I moved to New York, and 6-7 months after getting here, I got my first Broadway show, which became the 1999 original cast revival of Kiss Me, Kate. And I walked in to sign in the first day, and of course, sitting there was Adrienne Lennox, because she played the role of Hattie. And I could not have taken it as a better omen that this person that I just had so much respect for and so much love for was going to be in the company as one of the principal leads. And we became friends on that show and have stayed friends ever since. I was actually at her opening night for Doubt. I sat with her daughter, Crystal, who is a songwriter, and who's also gone on to appear in
I just saw
Motown
her
on Broadway.
Town Hall. She's amazing.
She's amazing. And we've just managed to stay friends for all these years. She's been a huge influence in my life. I admire her not just as a singer or as an actor, but her integrity as a human, as a parent, as an artist. All of those things come rolled into it, and just a tremendous entertainer.
Well, people, the bill just for this Darrell Henline Award on October 2nd is beyond. We have Jared Spector and Kelly Barrett, a married couple that you have directed. How did you meet Jared and Kelly.
Well, my one of my early clients at Feinstein's and at the Algonquin was a wonderful singer named Shira Ben David, who's now
I love Shira Ben David.
Yeah,
beautiful.
Well, she's now a cantor in Chicago, and her brother Adam Ben David, who is musical director over at Book of Mormon, her brother brought me on board to work with her, and we had a very successful 3 or 4 shows, and then at a certain point he contacted me because he liked what I had done with Shira, and he said he was starting to work with Jared, and would I be interested in taking a meeting? So we took the meeting, and Jared was not with Kelly at that point. He was, I think he was still in Jersey Boys, but memory is not perfect there.
Right.
And we created a show called Minor Fall, Major Lift, which is a quote from Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen. And we made the show about music being your mistress, that you cannot live with it and you cannot live without it. You have to have it. Right. And we covered a lot of ground in how he had started out as a child performer, how he'd left performing, and how singing and music drew him back, and he had to do it. We've worked together now, gosh, I think it's got to be 7 or 8 years. I just did Kings and Queens for them in the fall last year, their new show that they're touring now, which is about the kings and queens of rock and roll. Right. And he met Kelly through a workshop, and then they eventually got involved and got engaged and then got married.
Right.
And the next time that we worked together, it became a show for the 2 of them. And Kelly very graciously welcomed me into her relationship with Jared. And it was a very different dynamic. Kelly works in a, you get a chemistry with a performer. And so you throw a different chemical into the mix, things are always adjusting. But it turns out that the 3 of us actually complement each other very well. Kelly is very detail oriented, and she keeps you honest at all times.
Yeah.
And I think we found a way to tell the stories that they want to tell in an acutely honest way.
Yeah. They're both very effective actors.
They're just such great performers. They really are.
Good performers. And that room was rocking. 54 below, as they can sing their faces off.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah.
And
it's not like they have no talent.
Yeah. And they're both adorable to look at. So people watching this, you've got Melanie Vaughn, KT Sullivan, Adrian Lennox, Jared Spector, Kelly Barrett. Let's name one more. Well, no, we've got so many. It's just crazy. Aaron Lee Battle, Ben Moss, Bonnie Kramer, Steve Ross. It goes on. And all these people are showing up to celebrate Eric Michael Gillett. And I will say that the board meeting discussing Eric Michael Gillett as the recipient, the most wonderful piece of this was that one of our board members was married to Daryl Henline. And he said, I know this in my heart. This is Keith Merritt's, that Daryl admired Eric Michael as much as he admired any person in Cabaret and believed in his talent. So this has a real symmetry to it. And it's going to be an incredible celebration of a wonderful Cabaret supporter in Daryl Henline, with incredible taste, and then somebody who set the bar so high as our first recipient that anybody else down the road to receive this award, it's about consistent professional excellence and distinction. And clearly, my friend, Eric Michael, and also my director.
Yes, that's you.
That's right. You have done us an honor by letting us honor you.
Well, I'm very touched. I do feel a little bit like Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer going to their own funeral. I will say, because we've been on for a while, but I will say that I think I'm tremendously honored that Steve Ross is doing this, because he's been one of the first people in New York Cabaret, aside from Julie Wilson, to welcome me wholeheartedly. He actually comes and sees me performs and never misses a chance to send a letter afterwards to say what he's liked about it. I am equally in awe of him. He's a masterclass. And Ben Moss and Bonnie Kramer are my students. And Ben just won the Lucille Lortel Award. He was the musical director of Oratorio for Living Things at Ars Nova. And spectacular talent, and Bonnie
Yep.
Kramer will blow you away. So
I
it's
love
great.
Bonnie Kramer. I saw her in the Benjamin House benefit, and I called our mutual friend Robin Westall and said, "Who is that?" And I mean, just unbelievable talent. And
Yeah.
Steve Ross, there's funny because you hear people give themselves monikers or give themselves titles, but the New York Times, I don't know if it was Stephen Holden or not, called him the Prince of Cabaret.
The
And
Crown Prince of Cabaret.
And I completely and wholeheartedly agreed.
Yeah.
There was no
He's-
question
he's-
mark on that one.
He is exquisite. He's exquisite. And I'm so thrilled he's going to be there.
Well, it's going to be a huge balance of old and young, which Cabaret should be anyway. It can be represented by just huge talent. And I can't thank you enough for bringing these people to this is a fundraiser for the American Songbook Association. Yes. And we continue a lot of education programs, and people like Eric Michael showing up to help us keep showing up for these kids is huge. And we are incredibly grateful. Eric, Michael, Gillett, thank you so much for being here today. If you want to get tickets to see this thing, I believe that half the house is already sold and we're 6 weeks out. So get your tickets at chelseatableandstage.com. Eric, Michael, thank you. I'll see you soon.
Yes.
Much love. Thanks. And thank you very much for watching today. This will be on YouTube for all time for you to watch again or have your friends watch. I'll be posting it before the October 2nd show. And if you're not a member of the American Songbook Association, $65 gets you an annual membership. And as a benefit of membership, you get a year's subscription to Cabaret Scenes magazine. So please look at the clicker that's rolling by on the bottom of the screen, or the banner, I'm sorry, and subscribe. We'd love to have you, and we'd love for you to see what it is we're doing to preserve and promote jazz, musical theater, and the Great American Songbook. I am Carolyn Montgomery. I'm signing off for today. Thank you so much for coming.